Welcome to the AI for Good Global Summit here in Geneva, and I'm now delighted to be joined by John Geater, who's the founder of DataTrails.
Hi.
John, what brings you here?
Well, I'm presenting here at the summit, but I'm also here to network with expert colleagues and learn what we can learn about how we can take this potentially, even actually, very powerful technology of AI and turn it to good use cases rather than bad. We take back that balance of power and harness AI for good.
Now, a lot of talk has been about regulation, about making sure that we go from what needs principles to implementation.
Yeah.
And in your case, I think you like to talk about technology standards.
Of course, yeah. So I'm a technology guy, so it's sort of not my place to do that. But I also think the technology standards can really help to crystallize what's possible from what isn't. You know, a lot of the regulations are honestly very earnest. I'm super impressed by how fast and how well regulations on both sides of the pond have gone. But they maybe try to tackle a bit too much at once. And by adopting a technology standards approach, which we'll be discussing later today, the Friday of the summit, you can actually kind of eat the elephant one bite at a time, as it were, and solve little bits of the problem. So we can actually make concrete progress a little piece at a time, and that's why we work on those.
But John, you're on the technology side, you're on the private sector side, so people are saying, but you don't want regulations.
Everybody needs to know where to start, right? So there's always this tension between sort of over-regulation, potentially stifling innovation. Actually, it doesn't have to be that way, and you can see, especially as lawmakers become more sophisticated and educated over the years, this is really just an extension of software. It's huge in all sorts of ways, but we are learning how to bring regulation as a kind of blueprint for what people should worry about and how they should manage their outcomes, rather than just stamping down and saying, destroy all the machines. So I think we're coming to a much better place where the regulation can simply be a guidebook for saying, this is how you use this thing well, and these are the outcomes you want to have. I'm perfectly happy. I welcome regulation to do that.
Then what's standing in the way?
I think a few things. Pace is huge, right? So the technology always moves faster than the regulations, and there's been lots of good material and presentations here at the summit talking about that tension between kind of regulating the technology versus regulating the outcomes. Outcomes clearly are more durable in this kind of space, so that's an issue. But also, I think simply advertising that approaches do exist. There are solutions to these things. There are standards being built that people can interoperate around. It's not very well known, so I think raising the knowledge of what's possible and what's out there and what actually can be done over the noise of all the fear and panic, I think that's an eternal challenge, and it's certainly a thing now.
Okay, I'm sold. You sold it to me. So where do we go from here?
Perfect. So I think first thing that's always worth saying in any of these, my career, I've gone all through the IoT panic and the software supply chain panic and things like that. So don't panic. There's lots and lots of areas of AI that are perfectly harmless. There are lots of areas where the use cases maybe are quite harmful. And firstly, separating those out so that we understand what we're trying to achieve is definitely very important. But then the next thing is, I think, just to understand that whether it's audit trails, so what we do essentially, and the standards that I'm working on, is kind of like food labeling, but for data. So the same way that you want to know all the ingredients, you want to know where it came from, whether your candy bar was prepared in a place with nuts. We do the same thing for data. So we tell you, where did it come from, who made it, how was it made, what AI engine processed it, and really getting on board with those standards that already exist, the bodies that are already formed, and even some of the announcements that are being made at this global summit here in 2024. I think that's the way that we make real concrete progress.
And I like the way you compare it to like food tracing. It's data tracing, same thing. Where's it come from? Overall, who wants to know that?
Everybody in a way, right? So again, I think one thing that's really important with any fast-moving technology area is to kind of demystify it, because there's nothing new under the sun. And whether we want to compare AI safety and security to regular software safety and security, and there's evidence from places like the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US where they've done exactly this, they just extended those rules, or whether we want to take a more social approach like things like food labeling or simply safety. If you were in charge of an electric grid and you were responsible for it not catching fire yesterday, well, if you add AI, you're still kind of responsible for not letting it catch fire. And it's just the same thing. So firstly, it's just demystify everything. And I think that's...
So you think we're exaggerating the threat? So HAL's not going to take over from the machine?
I think you just have to look at the use case. So it's important to understand that the threat isn't kind of all or nothing. And there are some areas like image, for example. We do quite a lot of work with media provenance, media authenticity. And some think that any AI-generated image is quote-unquote dangerous. Well, it isn't. Right? So if you have AI-generated art and it's touted as art, then no matter how realistic it is, it's still essentially just art, or it's satire, it's commentary or something. That's not dangerous. But if you have exactly that same image, but it's sold and promoted as news and used, for example, as is very pertinent now, in an election cycle, well, all of a sudden that use case is dangerous. So I think there is a threat, there's always a threat, but again, it's just a matter of kind of stepping one step back from the fact that it's AI and saying, what is this tool being used for? And then taking relevant precautions around those use cases. Be skeptical about the news you consume. Don't be too worried about laughing at a funny picture.
Interesting insight. Thanks very much. So that's John Geater from DataTrails, and we have much more coming up on the AI for Good Global Summit channel here, so do stay tuned.